Hi, I'm Marlene. I came to Thanksgiving with homemade pie, my two kids, and the kind of hope that still whispers, maybe this year will be different. But before we even made it past the entryway, my sister smiled and handed us paper plates. Said there wasn't room. Then she told me I was used to scraps. What kind of family sets the table and chooses who gets to sit? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt like the outsider in your own family? We arrived 7 minutes early. I knew that because Jonas kept glancing at the clock on the dashboard, like it was judging us for being on time to a place we weren't sure wanted us there. The houses in Paradise Gardens all look like they were copy-pasted from some catalog. Symmetric shrubs, door wreaths without a single leaf out of place, and welcome mats that say things they don't mean. I parked 2 doors down, like always. It's less conspicuous that way. Denise opened the door before I even knocked, as if she'd been timing us. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're early," she said, stepping aside without actually inviting us in. Jonas muttered a hello. Linny clutched the pie tin to her chest like a shield. Inside, it was exactly as I remembered. Soft jazz floating from hidden speakers. Air smelling like lemon cleaner and something expensive. The kind of clean that doesn't feel lived in. Relatives I hadn't seen in years moved through the space in polished shoes and muted laughter. We stood in the foyer like we were waiting for someone to announce our names. "Say hi, Jonas," I whispered, nudging him. He stepped forward, gave a soft hi to the room, not loud, but respectful. Denise's head turned so sharply I could hear her earrings swing. "In this house," she said, not unkindly but loud enough to stop conversation, "we speak up, strong. Try again, sweetheart." The room quieted, awkwardness hanging like perfume. Jonas stiffened. I could see the fight between doing what was expected and not wanting to be made a fool. Before he could respond, Denise clapped her hands. "Connor," she called to her son, "why don't you show Jonas how we greet guests properly?" Connor, clean-cut, confident, already rehearsing life as someone important, stepped forward and gave a practiced, booming, "Hello! So good to see you!" The room gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. Jonas looked at me. I smiled like it didn't hurt. "Thank you, Denise," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, triumphant, already walking back toward the kitchen. Jonas didn't say another word. He stood next to me, too still for a kid. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't move. I could feel his muscles tightening beneath my fingers like he was holding back something that didn't have words yet. We followed the scent of roasted turkey and expensive wine toward the dining room. The chandelier flickered, reflecting off glasses that had never seen a dishwasher. We passed smiling cousins and air kisses, but no one really saw us. Not truly. In a corner, I caught a glimpse of Denise whispering something to our mother. Ruth Ann looked over at Jonas, let out a light chuckle, and went back to sipping her wine. I looked at Jonas, at the slouch in his shoulders that hadn't been there an hour ago, and I thought we hadn't even made it past the hallway. Linny held the pie like it was something sacred. She'd helped make it, crushed the pecans herself, pressed the crust with her fingertips. She'd even whispered to it before we left, a hopeful kind of blessing only kids still believe in. We walked into the kitchen where Ruth Ann stood swirling a glass of white wine, her lips already glazed in that soft pink shade she reserved for guests and formal disapproval. Linny stepped forward, arms out. "I helped make this for you, Grandma." Ruth Ann looked at it. Not long. Just enough to glance, then smile, lifting her glass. "How quaint," she said, sipping again without taking the dish. Linny's hands dropped. So did her smile. I froze. Not because the word was cruel, on its own it wasn't, but because I knew exactly what it meant coming from Ruth Ann. I had grown up under its shadow. Quaint was the word she used when I wore clothes that didn't match, when I brought home art projects instead of trophies, when I existed just a little out of frame. Linny stood there waiting for a fuller response, but it never came. Moments later, Denise's daughter walked in holding a dessert wrapped in foil. "It's just from the bakery," she said, laughing. "I didn't have time to make anything." Ruth Ann's face lit up like someone had plugged her in. "Oh, now this," she said, unwrapping the edges. "This is presentation. Look at the drizzle. So modern." Linny didn't say anything, but her eyes flicked from the pie in her hands to the one now gleaming under the kitchen light. I reached out and squeezed her shoulder. She didn't look at me. An hour later, a neighbor wandered in to say hello. Ruth Ann, never one to waste an audience, began introducing the family like it was a recital. Denise and her children got full names and glowing descriptions. And this, she said, motioning toward Jonas without turning fully, is Denise's nephew, her cousin's boy. I felt the words land. They didn't explode. They just settled, like smoke. Jonas didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He nodded, soft, polite. The kind of nod that says, I heard you. I won't forget it. After the neighbor left, we retreated to the kitchen. Jonas leaned against the counter, chewing the inside of his cheek the way he does when he's keeping something in. Are we guests here? He said finally. Or family? I couldn't answer right away. My mouth opened, but nothing came. He wasn't trying to be dramatic. He wasn't angry. He was just asking. I looked down at the kitchen tile, old grout lines and pristine polish. And then I said the quietest truth I'd said out loud in a long time. I'm not sure anymore. We walked back toward the hallway, where the sounds of silverware and low laughter bounced off the walls. Denise glanced up just as we passed and said, with a grin that carried nothing behind it, We're almost out of room at the big table. Then she smiled. I breathed in, a little deeper than necessary. It started with the clink of a glass. Denise's voice floated across the room like perfume, sweet, practiced, with just enough lift at the end to make it sound gracious. We're a little tight on space this year, she said, her smile stretching like a ribbon pulled too taut. So I've set up something special for Marlene and the kids, something cozy. The room paused, a beat of silence that tried to decide if this was kindness or something else. Someone laughed, too light, too late. I stood there, my body suddenly too still, my breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. Jonas shifted beside me. Linny, still holding her paper napkin from earlier like it mattered now, looked up. Denise turned to us with the same face she used when showing off holiday decor. Here, she said, offering 3 paper plates trimmed in gold foil. You're used to scraps, right? No one moved. No one corrected her. The room was still, a diorama of curated comfort. Perfect table, perfect centerpiece, perfect people. Except us. I could hear the blood in my ears. Linny's fingers gripped my wrist, small and tense. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at Jonas. I stared at the plates in Denise's hands. She smiled wider. It's all set up in the garage. It's warm enough tonight. Jonas didn't reach for the plates. He didn't even blink. He looked at me and said, quiet as breath, Don't make us eat this silence again. I turned to him fully. His eyes were calm, not angry, just tired. So much older than 13 in that moment, he could have been the one raising me. Ruth Ann stood near the end of the table, sipping her wine like nothing had happened. Her eyes flicked over and then away. Denise just held the plates out, still smiling. I took them. The walk from the dining room to the garage felt longer than it should have. Every step past the crystal glasses, the layered linens, the familiar faces pretending not to notice, it hollowed something out of me. The garage door creaked as I opened it. Cold air slid in before we stepped out. Inside, the space smelled like old paint and forgotten plans. A folding table stood in the center. 1 chair, a crate, a half-used roll of paper towels. I set the plates down. Jonas pulled out the crate for Linny. She climbed on without a word. He sat on the chair and stared at the wall. I stood there a moment longer, still holding my breath, still trying to find my footing in a place meant for tools and silence. Then I sat. This is the last time, I said quietly, not sure if I meant they'd do it again or if I'd let them. Jonas nodded once. The door clicked shut behind us. I don't remember agreeing to hold the coats. Maybe I nodded. Maybe I didn't. But suddenly I was in the garage again, watching Denise pose the family in front of the fireplace while I balanced a half-zipped duffel bag and a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres. They laughed as the flash went off, twice. One with silly faces, one serious. I saw Ruth Ann place her hand on Denise's shoulder just before the shutter clicked. Jonas and Linny weren't in the shot. Neither was I. Later, the photo showed up on Facebook. A friend from work messaged me the screenshot. "Did you skip this year?" I clicked the link. There it was. Everyone tagged. Denise glowing in her cocktail dress, her kids centered like royalty, Ruth Ann sipping wine, framed perfectly. The caption read, "So grateful for my beautiful family." My name wasn't there. Neither was Jonas's. Neither was Linny's. Someone, probably a well-meaning cousin, had tried to tag me. I removed it. The post had over 100 likes. I sat on the edge of a cooler and stared at my phone, the glow making the garage feel even darker. "You okay?" Jonas asked, breaking the silence. "I'm fine," I said. And that was a lie I'd told so often it didn't even sound wrong anymore. Later, after dinner, during the mess of cleanup, Denise walked past the garage holding a wine glass and laughing. "At least Marlene got a free meal," she called out. Someone clinked a glass. Another snorted softly. Ruth Ann didn't say a word. I froze. Linny reached for my hand, not even knowing why. She just felt something shift. I thought I was numb until I looked at Jonas. He was facing the wall, eyes locked on nothing. He didn't look at me, didn't blink. I think that hurt more than anything else. A little later, as I refilled our plastic cups from a bottle of room-temperature apple juice, one of Denise's friends stepped into the garage. She was tall, wore neutral colors, and polite curiosity. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. I shook my head. I always thought you were the older sister," she said, voice quiet. "The way she talks to you, it's strange." I met her eyes, nodded once. "She seems like someone who doesn't know what she's holding," the woman added, then walked away before I could respond. I stood there holding 2 napkins, wondering if my hands had always trembled or if I'd just started noticing. Back inside the garage, Jonas looked up as I stepped in. "I don't want to come here next year," he said. I set the napkins down beside the cooler. "Neither do I whispered. It was after dessert that the red envelopes appeared, thin flashes of color tucked between manicured fingers and playful laughs. The other grandchildren ran through the hallway like it was Christmas morning, waving their envelopes in the air as if they'd won a prize. I heard someone say, "Grandma's still got the magic touch." And then more laughter, sharper now. We were still in the garage. The air had cooled. Linny was sitting cross-legged on the crate, humming softly, tracing patterns on her napkin. Jonas leaned against the wall, staring at his shoes. Then Ruth Ann passed by the small window. She didn't stop, didn't look in. She walked right past, sipping her wine, talking to someone over her shoulder. Linny looked at me. "Did she not see us?" she asked. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. Jonas didn't speak. He clenched his hands, his jaw set in a way I was starting to recognize. I swallowed hard. My voice, when it came, was smaller than I expected. "Maybe she forgot." Linny blinked slowly, like she was filing that answer somewhere far away. I wanted to say more, to fix it, to make it soft, but there was no version of that moment that didn't cut. Jonas stood and began clearing the table. He stacked the plastic forks. He crumpled the napkins. He found a piece of paper towel and started wiping the folding table, corner to corner, slow and precise. Linny wrapped the leftover pie without being asked, folding the foil edges like I did at home when the kitchen light was low and the silence meant the bills were paid, but barely. No one had told them to grow up like that, but they were growing anyway. From the garage, the music in the main room seemed louder now, voices bumping against each other, the occasional burst of laughter like a balloon popping. No one called our names. No one came looking. "I should have never brought us here," I said, my voice breaking in places I didn't plan. Jonas didn't look up. He didn't blink. He just said, "Then don't ever again." There was no bite in it, no rebellion, just a statement. Linny reached for my hand and held it tightly, her fingers already cool. We sat like that for a long time, just the 3 of us, just outside of everything. Later, as we packed up the cooler and folded the napkins and tried to make sense of another Thanksgiving spent as background noise, Jonas pulled out his phone. He opened the Notes app and started typing. I didn't ask what he was writing, but I knew it mattered. Something was shifting. I heard the applause before I saw her. Denise's voice floated out from the dining room, just loud enough to reach the garage. Something about being so honored and humbled. I couldn't catch all of it. just enough to recognize the tone, the one she used when she wanted to sound modest but still needed everyone to know she was the star. Jonas looked up from his phone. I didn't move. "She's been nominated," Ruth Ann announced, her voice proud, clear as crystal through the cracked window, "to speak at the Women of Grace event next month, the neighborhood charity." The clapping came next. A few glasses tapped. Someone said, "Well deserved." Denise laughed. That practiced, effortless sound that always made my stomach twist. I sipped the last of my lukewarm cider, and it tasted like vinegar. That was the event. The same one I used to volunteer for years ago, when I was still figuring out how to keep the lights on after the divorce. The one I quietly wrote blog posts about, pouring out stories from shelters and women who reminded me of myself. She hadn't volunteered. She hadn't shown up. She'd just taken it. I reached for my phone, more out of reflex than purpose. Notifications blinked like they always did. Bank alerts, a weather warning, a coupon I'd never use. And then, there it was. One unread email. Subject: "You wrote once, I never forgot." From Cassandra Hale. I opened it. She kept it brief, elegant, like the woman herself. She had followed my writing for years. She remembered a series I wrote during a particularly rough winter, posts about resilience, about rebuilding from nothing. She was organizing the same charity event Denise was now claiming credit for, and she wanted me to speak. Keynote: fully paid. Travel, childcare, covered. "We need voices like yours," she wrote. "Not just polished ones, honest ones." I read it twice, 3 times. I didn't feel giddy. I didn't cry. I just sat with it, quiet and still. Linny had fallen asleep, her head pressed into Jonas's shoulder. He was scrolling through something silently, one arm curled around his sister protectively. The garage was quieter than it had been all day, and I realized I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to perform. I just needed to say yes. So I did. I typed the reply slowly, as if I were carving it into something that mattered. Yes, I'd be honored. No extra words, no exclamation points, just a full stop, a kind of beginning. I plugged my phone in beside the cooler, screen up. I didn't need to hide anything anymore. Jonas walked by, catching the name on the screen. He didn't ask. He just smiled, faint and sure, and said, "Good, finally." It began with a hum, low, distant, unfamiliar. Jonas was the first to notice. He stood, walked over to the grimy garage window, wiped a circle clear with his sleeve, and stared out into the dark. Linny followed, standing on tiptoe behind him. Her voice was barely more than breath. "It's a limo." I didn't move. I didn't need to. Something in the air had shifted. It moved through the concrete, through the silence, through the way Jonas didn't blink. I set my paper plate down on the folding table, wiped my hands on my jeans, and waited. The engine stopped just outside the garage, not at the front of the house, not at the circle driveway where Denise usually lined up guest parking like trophies. This was deliberate. The passenger door opened first, then the driver stepped out in a crisp suit, glancing toward the garage before walking around to open the back door. And then she stepped out. Cassandra Hale didn't move like someone new. She moved like someone expected, like someone who knew the weight of being ignored and how to carry it. Inside, the curtains rustled. I saw Denise's silhouette freeze at the edge of the dining room, her wine glass midair, her posture suddenly unsure. Cassandra scanned the house once, slowly, then turned her body toward the garage. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight across the lawn, heels clicking softly against the sidewalk, the chill of the evening wrapping around her coat like it belonged there. She stopped 2 feet from the garage door, knocked once, and called out, not loudly, but with perfect clarity, "I'm looking for Marlene Duval." Inside, someone dropped a fork. Linny's hand found mine. I stood. My knees didn't shake. Jonas stepped beside me. From the window, I could see Denise take a step toward the front door and then stop. Ruth Ann stood behind her, unmoving, lips parted. I opened the garage door. The air was cooler now, but I didn't flinch. Cassandra met my eyes, nodded once, and said, "We have a seat saved for you up front." I didn't ask where. I didn't ask why. I just said, "I'm ready." Jonas and Linny followed me outside. We walked in silence, past the shadows of people who had erased us, past the curtains that only opened when someone important arrived, past the table we weren't allowed to sit at. Cassandra opened the car door. I turned back once, just once, and looked through the garage light, through the window, and straight into Denise's eyes. She said nothing. Neither did I. But everything had already been said. The apartment was still, the kind of stillness that doesn't ask to be broken. Light stretched across the kitchen tile in soft stripes. I sat at the table in my robe, pen in hand, a blank sheet of paper in front of me. Not a text, not an email, not a performance, just ink and truth. I wrote slowly, no accusations, no demands, just a boundary. I'm done playing small to make you comfortable. That was the sentence that stopped my hand. I read it twice. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope with no return address, and placed it under the stack of outgoing mail. There would be no phone call, no dramatic confrontation, just a line, finally drawn. Days passed. The letter was picked up. The silence stayed. No missed calls, no apologies, not even a forwarded message from Denise pretending she didn't know. That was their reply. Quiet, like it had always been. But I didn't regret sending it. I only regretted how long it took me to write it. Jonas noticed, of course. He notices everything. He didn't ask why I stopped checking my phone. He just stopped asking if we were going back for Christmas. Linny asked once. I told her the truth. No, baby, we're not invited, and that's okay. She nodded slowly, then said, I like our table better anyway. A few days later, Cassandra sent the final version of the contract. Publishing rights, keynote details, travel accommodations. It was all there. I printed it, signed it, and laid it on the kitchen table like it belonged there. Like it had always been waiting for me to stop doubting I deserved it. Jonas walked by, glanced at the stack of papers, and said, Is that for the summit? I nodded. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. That evening, we cooked together. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken and store-brand mashed potatoes. But Linny lit candles she found in the bathroom, and Jonas folded the napkins into triangles like he'd seen at the restaurant I used to clean after hours. We sat down together, mismatched plates and all. I raised my glass, just water, and said, To the table we built ourselves. Linny beamed. Jonas gave a small, satisfied nod. It wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. But it was ours. After dinner, as I loaded the dishwasher and the kids got ready for bed, I heard Jonas moving around in the kitchen again. When I came back, a small piece of paper was stuck to the fridge with the cracked banana magnet. It was a drawing, 3 chairs and a scribbled table, drawn in black pen. Underneath, in neat letters, it said, We're not missing anyone. Jonas sat at the kitchen table, his notebook open, pen tapping lightly against the margin. I was rinsing dishes when he cleared his throat. Not dramatically, just enough. Can I read you something? I dried my hands slowly and nodded. He read a story about a boy who lived in a house where his name was never written down. A house where birthday cakes had candles but no singing. Where the boy learned to speak softly because loud voices got ignored anyway. I didn't say anything when he finished. I couldn't. So I walked over, placed my hand on his shoulder and whispered, It's beautiful. And it's true. He nodded once, then went back to underlining the last sentence. I watched him, wondering if healing looked a lot quieter than I ever imagined. Later that afternoon, Linny climbed up beside me on the couch, curled her knees beneath her like she always did when something big was on her mind. Can we do Thanksgiving here next time? She asked. Just us? I didn't hesitate. Yes. We started planning that same night. Nothing elaborate, no choreographed seating, no place cards, no one forced to smile through being invisible. Just food, honesty, light. We made a list. Jonas would make his garlic rolls, Linny wanted to help decorate with leaves she'd collect outside, and I'd try that sweet potato recipe again, the one no one ever really tasted but us. We didn't talk about who wasn't invited. We just didn't set extra places. A few days later, Cassandra called. I've been thinking about you, she said. You ready to speak wider? I paused, not because I doubted, because I finally understood what the answer meant. Yes, I told her, but not to fix the past, to show others they're not alone in it. There was a softness in her voice when she replied, That's the only reason that matters. On Thanksgiving evening, the table wasn't big, but it was full. Two of our neighbors came, both single moms I'd met at school drop-off. One brought cranberry salad, the other brought laughter. Linny helped light the candles, carefully protecting the flame with cupped hands. Jonas lined up the mismatched plates like it was a ceremony. When we sat, I raised my glass and without rehearsing said, "To everyone who ever felt erased, you were never invisible to yourselves." We clinked glasses, and we ate. No one knocked, no one called. The silence from the old family was steady now, no longer sharp, just distant. I let it stay that way. After dinner, while I was folding napkins into triangles just because, Linny walked over to me and tugged on my sleeve. "Do you think they miss us?" she asked. I bent down to her level, brushed the hair from her face, and smiled, not cruel, not smug. "I think they miss who they thought they owned. If there's anything I've learned, it's that silence doesn't protect you. It only hides you from yourself. For years I stayed small because I thought it was safer. I accepted crumbs, thinking they were better than nothing. But dignity doesn't grow in the shadows. It begins the moment you stop apologizing for needing a seat at the table and start building your own. Maybe your story doesn't look exactly like mine, but if you've ever felt erased, unseen, or like love came with conditions, I hope this reminded you. Your worth is not a debate. It's not measured by how well you blend in, but by how boldly you decide to exist. What about you? Have you ever drawn a line that changed everything? Or maybe you're still figuring out where to draw it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone. If this video touched your heart, comment A or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't, tell me why. Your honesty matters here. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories that hit close to home. Your voice helps us grow this space into something real. Thanks for being here.